everybody, and welcome to the Project Dreammaker podcast. I'm your host, Stephen R. Burns, and I'm thrilled today to be joined by Erin Healy. She is a best-selling author and professional editor, and she has been my editor for 20 years, so that already speaks to her amazing patience. And, you know, if you read anything and there's any bad habits in there, that's not on me. And anyway, thrilled to have Erin with us today. And we talk about this all the time. This is for entrepreneurs, it's for artists, for those in the game. And so, Erin, what we wanted to start with was you growing up, and you were an Army, and like how it kind of shaped to where you are now. And you were an Army brat growing up, is that right?
Air Force, yeah, Air Force and Navy, right. Actually, but military brat, you can say.
Military brat, okay.
Yeah, my father was an Air Force pilot who made a transfer to the Naval Reserves and became a Navy pilot. So he had an interesting career as a pilot. We moved a lot as a kid, so I was pretty trained through the Southwest, and I don't know that necessarily had a direct impact on my life as a writer and editor. But what did was I had really supportive family. I had, you know, both of my parents, a lot of family, friends, teachers, very supportive people who just encouraged me to do the things I was good at. And so I got a lot of positive feedback, writing, learning how to edit, learning how to teach, which is a part of editing. And yeah, those are. My mother also encouraged me to read a lot. She was always buying me books, which I devoured, of course. So I was a pretty avid reader at a very young age.
Right. I was just going to ask you, because I speak to this too, is most people sometimes forget that writers come from, usually when you're young, you're just avid readers, right? Like it's sort of.
Yeah, well, I wonder if that's changing a little bit. I do think most writers, you have to be a reader to be a really good writer.
That's
but
right.
You don't have to be a reader to be a really good storyteller. And so I think there are some people who gravitate to story, to film, or to audiobooks, or to theater, or TV drama, or there's all kinds of story. It comes in different forms. But yeah, writers are usually readers first.
Right. Yeah, it's, you know, if you're of a certain vintage, cue the white, you know, when I was young, there weren't all these avenues for storytelling that you have now. Like it was, and you know, obviously we had television, but it wasn't, you know, 200 cable networks, you know, looking for story. It was 3 networks. And so I know
and I was allowed to watch a TV show once a week. There was like a Little House on the Prairie, or, you know, Chips, if you remember. Eric
I
Estrada.
do.
Yeah, it was like once a week we had TV night. Yeah.
We didn't watch a ton either, but books, my parents would just leave me in a bookstore library for hours. And, you know, and so so you're right, that part has changed. So describe now, I mean, you've written and published 10 or 11 novels, right?
10, yeah.
10, and now you've been a professional editor, and so you and I go way back because you were just starting out. So tell me about what you do now as an ed, like what your job.
So I'm called a developmental editor. So I don't do the copy editing and proofreading, which is a different stage of editing, but I work with writers on the front end of the process, developing their concepts and ideas. And I do it particularly for fiction, which is a really craft-driven form of writing. And memoir also has some similarities to fiction. Didn't mean that to be a joke, but it could be.
Depending on who wrote it.
So, yeah, depending on who's writing it. Yeah, it could be fiction. So that's really my focus, is helping to teach and to develop craft in storytelling at the 30,000 foot level, the really big picture level of plot and character and theme and setting and so on and so forth. So yeah, when you and I met, I was just starting as a freelancer, which I've been doing now for 19 years. And I've been editing for almost 30 years.
Wow.
So time marches on very fast.
Well, yeah, and to those who are listening, freelancer means it's her business.
Right.
So this is
Right. Yeah.
this is the entrepreneur part. Just in case someone wanted
Exactly.
to clarify that. And
Yeah.
now, I remember when I first contacted you, and I had contacted a publishing agency that you had worked at, and I think you were still doing some contract work for them, and they said contact Erin Healy, and anyway, that's how we met. But you went from working in a company and then deciding to go out on your own, and that's a leap that a lot of entrepreneurs take. I have another guest that I interviewed was an installer for a business, and then he had collected so much knowledge and information that he ended up starting an installing business, and so now then he's moved on, and now he owns an even bigger company that does that as well. So talk to me about that transition from working for, like, as an editor for a company, and where you were there, and that decision to start your own business.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was a senior editor for a division of Random House, and had been there for several years. And a couple things happened. One is I was really overworked. I just had a really heavy workload that was causing some stress. I also had a 3-year-old. My oldest child was 3 at the time when 9/11 happened. And those three things, 9/11, having a 3-year-old, having an overload, just too much work, really started me thinking about my values and how I was spending my time. Our 3-year-old started to exhibit signs of stress, and both of us, his dad and I, were both working. So, I started evaluating whether there were other work options that would allow me to work from home. And I was able to leave in part because I was overworked. So by leaving, I said, look, I'll take this work with me, but I'll just work for you on a contractual basis for the next 6 months rather than as an employee, so that I didn't just leave them high and dry. And they were willing to negotiate with me for that. And so it worked out win-win for both of us. I think one of the big obstacles to making a leap like that is there's this notion that you're financially secure if you're with a good paying employer, and you don't have the risks of instability that you do when you're on your own. And I just don't think that's true. I was laid off from an employer at one time as an editor, and then rehired to another company. But I think we live in a time when you could be laid off at any moment for any reason. It's just not a stable economy, even if you are employed. So I think that's a little bit of a myth that you can kick out of the way. Are there risks to being self-employed? Of course. Is it hard? Of course. Do you get paid regularly? No. So you have to take those things into account, but that is probably one of the biggest things that prevents people from making the leap, that I just don't think is true. So you need to have knowledge of your industry and whether your services are of value and people will pay you for your services. But industry anyway, I don't know, the book publishing industry is not stable. It wouldn't be stable whether I worked in-house or I was a freelancer. So you learn to work with those risks.
Yeah, I was going to say, listen, you're the first person that I've talked to and interviewed here that has actually mentioned that that there is that when you work for an employer, and I can say this as someone who has worked for an employer, my day job working with special needs workers. Yeah, it's just, 1 year it's like, well, sorry, we had these cuts and that's it. So we don't actually need anybody. And that's true of any job, because there are a lot of people that say the one obstacle is they want that check every 2 weeks. But depending on your industry, and like you said,
it
the
does
publishing
depend on the new industry. Yeah,
right,
it really does.
like if you're in tech, maybe that's different, right? Like I have a
Yeah, it
good
could
friend
be.
who's in tech, and they like he can work wherever, right? Forever. Like you'll
Yeah,
always have a job. That although I mean, tech would be a great industry to go it on your own too, but
yeah,
but in the publishing industry, it really has been unstable. And you and I have talked about this over the years, Erin. That
mhm.
as particularly, I don't know when you would frame that, but I would think going back to the advent of self-publishing, or would you push it back even further than that, where it really, where maybe it's the internet, maybe it's all the other forms of storytelling that you talked about,
Yeah.
where the book industry itself is, you know, I don't want to use the term combustible, but
Well, it is. It is. And there are a couple of reasons for it. I do think the advent of self-publishing began to change the landscape when it became not. It, there was a time when self-publishing had some stigma to it because it was like, oh, those are all the people who can't get published by a traditional house. So there was a perception that self-publishing was substandard. Um,
right,
what has happened in the years since then, though, is that people have learned how to master that avenue to putting their books in the hands of readers. And there are people who are doing it so well and so successfully that now it's like, what do I need a publisher for anyway? So there's a huge shift there. Another shift that happened was simply this probably predated publishing, self-publishing a bit, and that was the rise of the internet and social media. And that the effect of that wasn't direct on books, but what it did was it fragmented the marketplace. So the avenues a publisher would use to sell books fell into 1,000 tiny pieces. You do direct marketing now. That was kind of direct mail marketing was this weird thing, 30
right,
and you don't do direct mail marketing anymore, but you do Facebook
yeah,
ads.
or
You don't
you
have
do
to put your book in a bookstore.
no, you do
Yeah.
direct email marketing, right? Like every entrepreneur knows
Yeah.
the email list is key. So I have
Email
an
is
email list.
shifting. Yeah. That
It's but
even
it's
that though is shifting really fast because millennials aren't on email anymore. They're on the others, Instagram and Snapchat and the other. So nothing is
TikTok.
constant. Yeah. So
No,
you constantly have to be flexible and be following trends and stuff. A third really massive shift for publishing was the crash in 2008 in the States when the banks all their
overextended.
all
Yeah.
their loaning, yeah, the crash of everything, that was just a terrible financial crisis. Whenever there's an economic crisis, people of course immediately bring in all of their sorry, my brain is
And no, the like the entertainment,
their
the
disposable
extra,
income. Yeah,
right?
any
Yeah,
disposable income that you have, that might have been put into books, it goes somewhere else. We just don't have money to spend on print media. We're buying food, and so there was that. And of course, you're competing now with all these other forms of storytelling. Who wants to buy a $29 book when you could subscribe to Netflix for $15 a month? It's like the economics of how much entertainment you get. And I'm talking about fiction in particular. But
yes,
yeah,
right.
so there's a lot of factors that are swirling around why this
And
industry is unstable.
yeah, and I want to get on to this next
Yeah.
question, because you've managed to maintain your business throughout this cavalcade of just like this turbulence. But I did want to speak to anybody out there, particularly artists, in terms of the self-publishing, because and Erin would tell you that this is true, is that for many years I fought to, for the traditional, because I first looked at self-publishing, and when it first came out, like, to be fair, some of the stuff out there was really, questionable in terms of the writing and the craft and whatever. This is at the beginning. But the cost that you're talking about, if someone like a Hugh Howey, for example, who wrote the Wool series, and he's been super successful, and his books are really good. And obviously there are exceptions to the rule, but if you can market it yourself, that instead of $29, it's 10, right? And so if you find a name like a brand, because what goes on in the bookstore is very similar to what goes on in a person's house. Like, I love Robert B. Parker. Now, he passed away in I think '07, but I bought all of his stuff. It's just like, if you walk into a bookstore now, you have the Stephen King section, right? You have what, I don't know what the old saying was, Erin. The saying was like 5% of authors make 80% of the money, right? You have your
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
your
It's
James
even higher
Patterson
than
aisle.
that, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So if you can,
I don't know what the exact number is, but very small.
Yeah. So anyway, but you've been successfully doing this, working on your own business through all this turbulence. How have you managed to do that over the course of 2 decades?
Boy. Well,
simple question, just a simple question.
I don't know if I know the answer. I mean, I would say, well, I work hard, which is true. I do work very hard. I know a lot of people, though, who work hard who don't necessarily see the success that they're looking for. For me, I think part of it was that I remained adaptable, and I had a great start. I started freelancing with 6 months of guaranteed work. And so that 6-month period gave me time to get the word out and to network, and like, I'm freelancing now, and I can take. And the other aspect of that was that I knew very specifically what I do. I do a particular type of editing and a particular category of books, and I sort of specialized. The other thing that I think has helped is that I have tried to remain adaptable over the course of uncertainty. There's a cycle in book publishing that's separate from this economic instability, where they will work only in-house with in-house editors on their projects, and they have quality control, and they keep it all inside. And then their editors burn out, and there's too much work, and they start farming it out to freelancers. And that'll go on for a time, and then something will happen where they start pulling it back in-house again. So there's this, I call ourselves, we're the outhouse editors, out of house and in-house and out and in, and it cycles through. And so I've been able, by providing services to independent authors who are either self-publishing or who are not yet represented by an agent and a publisher, serving them with editorial work. And being able to serve them has helped during dry spells with the traditional publishing houses. So that's been really, that has seesawed a bit, and that's been really helpful. But I think for me, if I had to boil it down to one thing, it's that I know what I do well, and I stayed in that spot and didn't say, oh, I just have to take anything that comes along. I know what I enjoy doing. I know what I do well. And when you are good at what you do, then people will keep hiring you. So I think there are some things I don't do very well. And people have asked me, oh, would you agent my book? Would you be my agent? Let me just say, I would be the worst agent on planet Earth. You would not want me to be your agent. But, you know, there was a time when it was tempting to go, should I do that? Because that could be another revenue stream. So that balance that you're looking for between what do I do well, how focused should I be, and how broad should I be to keep my revenue stream broad. I don't think there's a science to that. It's a little more of an art, and you have to know yourself very well. I would get counsel, you know, on how to do that, but make a decision, and don't overextend yourself.
Yeah, there's like, you really, two things there that you mentioned that I think are really pertinent to entrepreneurs. One is the niche, the more niche your market, the more you can figure out excuse me, what your market is, the more likely you're to have success, because you're, you know, people aren't looking for general things. They're like, you know, I want to write, but I want to write this way in this genre, and I want to, you know, and so you're more likely, if you have that sort of, that niche figured out. And the other thing that you said without saying is stay in your lane. and once you know that, then you get better over time too. So, and to anybody who's watching or listening, Erin is the best. And we had I had a friend, Marcus William Castnich, on here. He was the first episode, and he went out of his way to talk about, like, because he had gone from basically having nothing, and then within 4 or 5 years had built up a 6-figure business. But he talked about the importance of mentors and how much that had helped. And then of course I mentioned you because without that mentoring. So, and for those of you listening, Erin mentored me as an editor, even though I was, one of her clients, and then we became friends for years and years. But that's the importance of mentorship, was having someone to say, okay, try this. Now, of course, I still haven't adopted your temperament, which is,
Which temperament is that, Steve?
The publishing temperament. The, like, really even, yeah, that one. I'm not going to mention you're Irish. The other, the one where you look like the patience and encouragement, the understanding that the writer is that you're not replacing, you're not trying to write for them, you're not projecting on them, you're trying to hear what they have to say. And I'm wondering, because I think that's been a big part of your success. But let me ask you this: what has been the biggest struggle for you, Erin, like over the last 20 years or so in doing this? Has it been the turbulence of the industry?
Probably not, just because I actually have had a really steady flow. I've never had such a dry spell where I felt I had to go do a side gig or something. I think my bigger struggle has been learning how to, because my work is a service, I provide services to somebody. I don't sell product. And a lot of times my services are associated with me. It's not like don't go hire Erin's editorial firm, it's go hire Erin. But so there's a limited amount of me. There's only so many hours in the day.
That's
I
right.
don't have other employees. And so for me, it has been, how do I turn this service into something that will eventually generate a residual income for me, so that I can, as I approach a retirement age, which is going to come really fast, how do I taper it off so I can still have income? That's been a real struggle for me, because the markets get saturated. There's only room for so many teen werewolf books, there's only room for so many online video courses. There's only room for so many people trying to sell you something. So that continues to be a challenge for me, to look for the passive income that would eventually allow me to retire, because my business, this one, isn't one I can go sell. I don't have a book of business that will, that I can sell to somebody someday. So that's been my challenge.
Yeah, I mean, you're the tap and the water. So, right. Yeah. And the only way people can drink is if they got to use, it's got to go through you and the work that comes with it. And I will. And if you want to talk about it at the end, I'm going to give you a chance to do that, because I think you have a great idea and a project that you're working on.
Well, it's a little nascent, so I probably won't talk about it yet, because it's not a reality. But have me back in a year, and then talk all right. I will. It will be a breaking success.
I will. So talk to me then about. Was there any kind of helpful advice that you got along the way, like something whether it was when you were transitioning to owning your own business, or maybe in some of the. And for those who are listening who don't know, Erin has worked with the biggest publishers, and she has transitioned to working with independent authors too. So if you are a new young author, you need to talk to Erin. So I'm on team Erin. So but is there was there any kind of advice that you received or heard, or a book that you read that really helped you through that?
all along the way, I think I've just been really, really blessed with lots of voices in my life that are so positive. And I had a couple mentors when I made a transition at one point in my career from editing magazines to editing books. So that's a shift. There was a learning curve associated with it. And I had a couple of editors kind of take me under wing, and I sort of shadowed them through editing their books and learned so much from them. One of them in particular, who is still a friend of mine today, she was a freelancer who was working for the company that I worked for. And my publisher said, go learn from her. She's really good. And when I went freelance, she said to me, do not ever apologize for what you charge. Set your rates and let those be your rates, and don't apologize for them. That advice has been really helpful to me, because I find in this entrepreneurial world, no matter what figure you attach to what you're selling, people will think you're too expensive and people will think you're too cheap. Like there's some indescribable, you can sell widgets for $1 million or $1, and the widgets people will go, oh my gosh, that's so expensive. And I have found that to be true. I have found some people, I happen to know my rates are kind of smack center average for the industry. And I get people who are like, oh, is that all? And I think, oh, I could have charged more. Or others who don't ever call me again because they learn what I charge, and either they don't know or it's just out of their budget, and they're like, wow, can't do that. And so just if you pick a figure that is relevant in your industry, it reflects your level of experience, it reflects the quality of your work, and you stick with that, you don't ever have to apologize for what you do. This might be a female thing. This might be a thing that some women struggle with more than men. That too I have found, where we feel like we need to be doing people favors, especially when we're in the service industry. We want to help everybody out. And so, oh, I know that's expensive and I know everybody can't afford that, but money's weird. Money just makes us weird. So that was one piece of advice that really helped me as a business person.
Well, I don't know if it's a woman thing, but I can tell you that subject has come up in nearly every interview that I've done. That pricing, like when I created my online course, How to Write in 90 Minutes, I struggled so much with what to charge, and this past week, I had a friend call me, and he knew somebody that needed an editor, and so they said, well, it's what do you charge for this and that? And I was trying to come up with it, and it was something I hadn't done before, in terms of, usually I work with books, fiction or non, but this was like a series of articles. And then I was like, okay, so how do I break this down? And so that pricing point, literally everybody that's come on the show has said, how do I do? And for me, my online course, Erin, was, and of course, obviously you and I have talked about this, but it's stuff that I did for free for people for over 20 years, right?
And you might have to in the beginning. Yeah. As you pay your own dues, you learn, you've got your own learning curve. You can't charge a professional fee until you're a professional, and sometimes it takes a little while to get there.
Right. Yeah. But those 20 years of helping people and then mentoring under you, and then all the writing and stuff has got to that point. But then now it's like, am I charging? And someone's like, oh, that's not very much for the course. And then someone else is like, well, that's kind of a lot. And I'm like, I guess I don't know. Maybe if you're upsetting some on both sides, I don't know. But that is a consistent on this podcast. That has been consistent for nearly every entrepreneur I've said is trying to figure out what that price point is and not apologizing for it. And you can make the adjustment, right? You can go up and you can go down.
You can make the adjustment. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, you can adjust up as you're, if things are in high demand, you can adjust just because they're in demand. That's how economics work. But
Right.
yeah, you can adjust up or down
And this
flex.
speaks to what you were saying earlier, because I can tell you, like, we know when we look at the quote unquote the stable jobs, in terms of what inflation, and I live in Toronto, Canada, which is one of the most
Yeah,
expensive cities in the world. You simply can't buy a house here unless you're like, you have to be
yeah,
making a ton of money to
yeah,
buy a house in Toronto. It's so expensive. But over the last 10 years, inflation hasn't raised the wages, right? Like, of these jobs,
yeah,
like the
exactly.
people are making the same, and the price of housing has gone up 150%. So, but when you're an entrepreneur, if you create the
Yeah,
demand, you can you can you can lift that. I just, before we go,
yeah.
if someone out there wants to be an editor, now they'll never be you. I mean, I do my best,
Oh, yeah.
but
You
you
you'll
know,
you
but
will surpass me one day.
that's never gonna happen.
You will. You already
We
have. I mean, whatever.
like you said, it will never happen. But I am grasshopper. But that's a very old reference. Sorry, kids, you're gonna have to look that up. Um, what advice would you give to someone who either wants to write or become an editor? And Erin, by the way, is a beautiful writer. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I would say, reading is the most important thing you can do, but then you have to teach yourself craft. And I'll just speak to developmental editing because I'm not trained to be a copy editor or a proofreader. But in developmental editing, the biggest job for me has learned that editing is basically being able to name things, to name story techniques, to name problems, to name solutions. And so you read, first you learn to read as a reader, because reading is an emotional experience. And then as an editor, you name the emotional experiences you have reading books. And you learn to teach yourself to name why you have these emotions as you read. And that's whether you're reading fiction or nonfiction or self-help or memoir or anything. What is the reason I feel confused right now as I'm reading this manuscript? And then you go back and you identify all of the things that are causing confusion, and then you learn how to fix them. And it's so intuitive. There are some editorial courses, like if you were to go through New York University used to have some. I don't know if they still do. With the pandemic, anything might be right now. But for the most part, you don't go get a master's in editing at most places.
No.
It's something that is mostly self-taught. It's best for readers who are really intuitive and creative. And if you're more analytical, you might be a better, say, copy editor than, not analytical, that's not what I meant to say. Developmental editors are very analytical, but more mechanically minded, more mathematically minded, more about knowing what all the rules are. Then you might be better as a copy editor, proofreader type.
Right.
So, it doesn't sound very helpful to say, well, just go teach yourself. But apart from taking any job at all in the communications field that requires you to turn a written piece of material into something that is easily understood by the people who are going to read it, that training happens. It's sink or swim. It's on the job. It's while you're running. And you just have to dive in and do it. I think most editors have an intuitive sense already that they're good at that. They can name things easily. So I hope that's helpful. It sounds really vague.
No,
I
think you're right. I think it's definitely more intuitive. If we're doing like the Myers-Briggs test, the personality test, right? Like they determine whether something is sensory or intuitive. So if people who are listening or watching have never taken it, I had to take it in grad school for a leadership course. And so what they do is they show you a picture, right? And they say, describe the picture. And whatever you think of personality test, but if you're sensory oriented, you can describe exactly like say it's like a turtle and, like a cartoon, right? Picture of a turtle and a frog, like whatever. And you could say the turtle is wearing purple pants, the frog is green with a hint of blah, blah, blah. And the people who are intuitive are like, well, the turtle is actually upset at the frog, right? And so that I don't know, remember what they're wearing, but man, he looks pissed. And so and so that's that's reductionism, but I also would say that if you want to be an editor, you kind of, I don't know how you do that without mentorship. You can be intuitive, and I don't know if you can. Do you know any editors that are not writers or that can't write well?
Yeah, not all editors are writers. I mean, most of them have very good writing skills. They have very good communication skills. Just like not all writers make good editors. But there is, if it's a Venn diagram, which I know is your favorite diagram, Steve.
It is.
Woo! There's a lot of overlap between the editing and writing circles. Yes, they come close together. I think, for editing, what an editor is this bridge between the written word and then the received or perceived word. So your job is to be able to identify a writer's intentions. What is the purpose of this writing? What are they attempting to say? And be able to understand why or how readers will receive it. And you're trying to close that gap between these two parties, the writer and the reader. So that's why it's so important that you be able to, this is why I tell people, when you're reading a book and you hate the book, if you want to be an editor, you stop and you say, why do I hate this book? What is it? And you figure it out and you name it. Now, sometimes it's just a personal opinion, but a lot of times it's not. A lot of times it has to do with the delivery. So I could talk about this all day.
Yeah, so could I.
Yeah,
so we'll it gets really for those listening, it gets really geeky and a little bit nerdy and super fun for Erin and I sometimes to break this shit down. So, but I just wanted to say we're going to wrap up now. But I wanted to tell you how much I loved having you on the show, and I definitely want to have you on next year because I love your idea. I think it would be awesome for some young writers out there. I will put your links down below on the YouTube channel.
Yes.
And anybody can find you. For those who are listening to this podcast, it's is it www. What's your link? What's your
it's ErinHealyEdits.com.
Oh, right. Okay. ErinHealyEdits.com. I was super close with the www.
My email address.
ErinHealyEdits.com. All right, Erin. Well, listen, thanks so much. And for those of you listening and for those of you watching on YouTube, I do have a free gift for you down below. Just go to my website. There'll be a pop-up and let me know where to send it. I can send you guys all kinds of free information. There's also a Writing Life Academy on this channel, and I have a new bit coming out every Friday called The Burns Perspective, which I will explain why it's called that. It's a little nod to my love of noir. But thank you guys so much for spending time with us today. Erin, thanks again for being here. And until we see you guys next time, take care.
Bye-bye.